Have you noticed that lately, normal life doesn't feel the same anymore? Conversations feel repetitive. Goals you once cared about suddenly feel empty. And even when nothing is wrong, there's this quiet sense that something underneath is shifting. Here's the thing, a lot of people are feeling this right now, but they can't explain it. It's not anxiety. It's not burnout. And it's not just imagination. You know what's wild? Some people feel increasingly overwhelmed, like the world is speeding up and they can't keep up. While others feel strangely calm, detached, observant, almost like they're watching an old version of reality fall away. People call this a quantum shift. But not as some cosmic event that happens to everyone at once. What's actually happening is far more personal. Because 2026 isn't going to change everyone. It's going to reveal who has already been changing internally. And if this resonates, it's not random. It's a signal that your perception, your identity, is reorganizing itself. So what's really happening here? Here's what most people don't realize until it's already happening. Major internal shifts don't announce themselves with clarity. They show up as discomfort, confusion, and a quiet sense that the old way of living doesn't fit anymore. At first, it's subtle. You lose interest in conversations you used to enjoy. You feel irritated by systems, routines, or goals you once chased without question. You scroll, you work, you socialize, but something feels hollow, like you're going through motions that no longer mean what they used to. Then the pattern deepens. Some people respond by doubling down. They push harder. They distract themselves. They try to get back to who they were. Others feel the opposite. They slow down, pull back, and start questioning everything. Why am I doing this? Why does this no longer feel aligned? Why does the future I was aiming for suddenly feel wrong? This split is the real problem. Because when a psychological shift begins, your mind doesn't update all at once. Your subconscious starts changing first. Your values begin to reorganize. Your tolerance for noise, chaos, and misalignment drops. But your external life, it stays the same. So now you're living with an internal operating system that no longer matches your environment. That mismatch creates tension. It shows up as restlessness, as sudden emotional exhaustion, as the feeling that you're outgrowing people, places, or ambitions, but you don't yet know what replaces them. And here's where confusion sets in. People experiencing this often think something is wrong with them. They assume they're unmotivated, ungrateful, or lost. But what's actually happening is more precise than that. Your mind is detecting a shift in identity before your conscious awareness has caught up. Some people ignore this signal. They numb it. They force themselves to stay the same. Others listen, and that's where the divide begins. Because as we move toward 2026, this internal split isn't going away. It's intensifying. The real question isn't whether a shift is happening. It's why some people feel destabilized by it, while others feel strangely prepared. And to understand that, we need to look at what's actually happening inside the mind when a quantum shift begins. Okay, so here's what's actually going on beneath the surface. What people call a quantum shift isn't a sudden external event. It's an internal reorganization of perception. And psychology has been mapping this process for decades, just using different language. Your brain is not designed to seek truth. It's designed to seek efficiency. From the moment you wake up, your mind runs on predictive models, mental shortcuts built from past experience. These models decide what you notice, what you ignore, what feels important, and what feels irrelevant. Most of the time, this runs automatically. This is where the reticular activating system, or RAS, comes in. Think of the RAS like the bouncer of your awareness. It filters millions of stimuli down to a manageable few, based on what your brain believes matters. If your identity, goals, and beliefs stay stable, the filter stays stable too. But here's the key insight. When your internal priorities change, even subtly, the filter starts updating before you consciously realize it. That's why things suddenly feel off. Not because the world changed overnight, but because your mind is highlighting different information. You know what's wild? Two people can live through the exact same year, the same economy, the same global stress, and experience it completely differently. One feels overwhelmed and threatened. The other feels oddly alert, almost as if something important is finally becoming clear. That difference isn't personality. It's perception. And perception is shaped by pattern recognition. Your subconscious mind is constantly scanning for patterns, emotional, relational, environmental. When a pattern no longer aligns with who you're becoming, it creates friction. That friction shows up as discomfort, boredom, or a sense that this no longer fits. This is often misinterpreted as laziness or lack of motivation. But neurologically, it's closer to a software update conflict. Your old neural pathways were built for a previous version of you. New values are forming, but the habits, environments, and expectations around you haven't changed yet. So the brain sends signals. A irritation when routines feel pointless. A restlessness when conversations feel shallow. Fatigue when goals feel empty. These aren't failures. They're feedback. Now let's layer in something important. Emotional salience. Your brain pays attention to what carries emotional weight. When something stops triggering emotion, excitement, fear, meaning, it drops in priority. That's why old ambitions can suddenly feel flat. The emotional charge that once fueled them is gone. This is also why people going through this shift feel hypersensitive. Your perception sharpens. Noise becomes unbearable. Inauthenticity becomes obvious. Misalignment feels physically uncomfortable. Not because you're becoming fragile, but because your awareness is increasing. And here's where the quantum metaphor actually makes sense. In physics, systems behave differently depending on the observer. In psychology, your life behaves differently depending on your level of awareness. The moment you start observing your patterns instead of unconsciously repeating them, those patterns lose their grip. This is why some people feel destabilized during periods of change. Their old identity is dissolving, but a new one hasn't fully formed yet. Others feel oddly grounded, not because they have answers, but because they've stopped resisting the shift. Now let's address something critical. Not everyone experiences this at the same time. Why? Because the trigger isn't the calendar year. It's readiness. Your subconscious only allows major perception changes when enough emotional data has accumulated. Old coping strategies stop working. And your identity can no longer sustain the previous worldview. That's when the mind loosens its grip on outdated beliefs. From the outside, this looks like a questioning career paths, a reassessing relationships, a losing interest in social validation, a craving depth over distraction. From the inside, it feels like standing between two versions of yourself. This is why some people experience fear during this phase. Their brain interprets identity change as uncertainty, and uncertainty as threat. Others experience curiosity. Their nervous system interprets the same shift as expansion. Same process, different response. So when people say 2026 will change everything, what they're really sensing is this. The psychological conditions that force awareness are accelerating. Old structures, internal and external, are becoming less tolerable. And only those who adapt internally will experience this shift as clarity rather than chaos. Which brings us to the deeper layer of what's happening. How conscious and subconscious systems interact during this transition, and why certain people feel like they're crossing a threshold rather than falling apart. That's where things get really interesting. Now here's where this stops being conceptual and starts becoming deeply personal. Because a quantum shift isn't something you understand intellectually first. You feel it. And usually, you feel it long before you can explain it. To understand why some people experience the approach to 2026 as a psychological breaking point, and others as a moment of clarity, we need to look at how this shift actually unfolds inside the mind, layer by layer. 1. The split between the conscious and subconscious mind. Your conscious mind is the narrator of your life. It tells the story of who you are, what you value, and where you're going. Your subconscious mind is the strategist. It tracks emotional outcomes, patterns, and survival efficiency, often without your awareness. Here's the tension most people don't recognize. Your conscious mind is invested in continuity. Your subconscious mind is invested in adaptation. When your subconscious determines that your current identity, habits, or environment are no longer serving your psychological growth, it initiates change silently. That's why this phase feels confusing. Consciously, you might think, "This is fine. I worked hard for this. This is what I'm supposed to want." But subconsciously, the signals say, "This no longer fits. This is draining us. This identity has expired." That internal contradiction creates friction, and friction is the beginning of transformation. You're not lost. You're between versions. 2. How the shift actually begins, and why it feels uncomfortable. The shift doesn't begin with clarity. It begins with discomfort. At first, it's subtle. You feel emotionally detached from roles you once identified with. Routines that once grounded you now feel empty. Goals you chased lose their emotional charge. Social interactions feel repetitive or shallow. Most people misinterpret this stage as burnout, depression, or lack of motivation. But psychologically, something else is happening. Your emotional salience is changing. The brain allocates energy based on meaning. When something stops feeling meaningful, the brain withdraws motivation from it. This isn't failure. It's reallocation. Think of it like outgrowing clothes. Nothing is wrong with the clothes. They just don't fit anymore. 3. The liminal phase, where most people panic. This is the most difficult part of the shift. You no longer fully identify with your old self, but your new self hasn't fully formed yet. Psychologically, this is called a liminal state, a threshold phase between identities. In this phase, certainty dissolves. Old labels feel inaccurate. The future feels undefined. Comparison becomes meaningless. External validation loses power. This is where anxiety often spikes, not because something is wrong, but because the brain dislikes ambiguity. The nervous system interprets uncertainty as danger. So people try to escape this phase by rushing into new goals, clinging to old relationships, numbing with distraction, forcing motivation, trying to fix themselves. But this phase isn't meant to be rushed. It's meant to be integrated. This is where the deepest restructuring happens. 4. Real-life examples of the shift in motion. Let's make this concrete. Example 1. The career identity collapse. Someone spends years building a career tied to status, productivity, or approval. They reach a milestone and feel nothing. Not emptiness. Detachment. Their subconscious has already calculated. This no longer defines us. They may feel guilt for feeling dissatisfied. But the dissatisfaction isn't ingratitude. It's growth. Example 2. Relationship realignment. A person suddenly feels disconnected from friends or partners they've known for years. The love may still exist, but resonance doesn't. This isn't superiority or coldness. It's values shifting beneath the surface. Your subconscious prioritizes emotional coherence. When a relationship no longer supports who you're becoming, discomfort appears. Example 3. Heightened sensitivity. Noise becomes unbearable. Drama feels exhausting. Crowds feel overwhelming. This isn't weakness. It's nervous system recalibration. As awareness increases, tolerance for overstimulation decreases. Example 4. Identity confusion. You struggle to answer simple questions. What do you want? Who are you becoming? Where are you headed? This isn't regression. It's identity loosening before reforming. 5. Why this shift feels timed around the future. Here's something important most people miss. The brain motivates change through future projection. When your subconscious sees that continuing the same way leads to stagnation, burnout, or emotional collapse, it creates urgency. That urgency often gets projected onto time. People say, "Something big is coming. I feel like I'm running out of time." Everything feels accelerated. But the calendar isn't the trigger. Readiness is. Your mind senses that the future version of you cannot survive in the old structure. That's why the shift feels inevitable. 6. The archetypal layer. Why quantum shift feels accurate. Across cultures, this phase has always existed. Psychology calls it a individuation, identity restructuring, a developmental transition. Mythology calls it awakening, initiation, a crossing the threshold. People call it a quantum shift because the change feels nonlinear. One realization can reorganize everything, not because reality changed, but because perception did. When perception shifts, life rearranges itself automatically. 7. Why some people experience this as chaos. Here's the uncomfortable truth. People who experience this shift as collapse usually have identities built on external validation, fixed roles, rigid belief systems, certainty and control. When those structures weaken, the nervous system panics. Others experience the same breakdown as relief. Why? Because they were already questioning, already loosening attachment, already listening internally. Same pressure, different relationship to change. The difference is psychological flexibility. 8. What this means moving forward. This shift isn't about becoming better. It's about becoming more aligned. Aligned with your values, your nervous system, your emotional truth, your authentic pace. This is why 2026 won't affect everyone the same way. Some will cling, some will numb, some will resist, others will adapt. And adaptation, not belief, is what determines who experiences this shift as awakening rather than collapse. So the real question isn't, will a quantum shift happen? It's, are you willing to let go of who you were to make room for who you're becoming? Because once that question becomes unavoidable, everything else begins to reorganize around it. And that brings us to the most practical part of this conversation. What does this shift actually change in your life, your relationships, decisions, goals, and sense of meaning when you stop resisting it? That's exactly what we're going to explore next. Now let's talk about what this shift actually changes in real life. Because everything we've explored so far, the discomfort, the identity loosening, the heightened awareness, means very little unless it translates into how you live, choose, connect, and move forward. This is where the quantum shift stops being an abstract idea and becomes a lived experience. And here's the key truth. A shift in perception always comes before a shift in circumstances. Your life doesn't change first. Your relationship to life changes first. That's why some people feel like their world is collapsing, while nothing external has actually fallen apart yet. 1. How this shift changes your relationship with yourself. One of the first and most noticeable changes is internal. You stop betraying yourself in small, unconscious ways. Before the shift, many people live with constant internal friction, saying yes when they mean no, staying quiet to avoid conflict, chasing approval they don't even respect, ignoring emotional signals to be rational. After the shift begins, something changes. You feel discomfort faster. Misalignment becomes harder to tolerate. You can no longer ignore what feels wrong without paying a psychological price. This isn't because you've become sensitive. It's because your self-trust is returning. Your subconscious is no longer willing to suppress information to keep the peace. That's why people say, "I can't lie to myself anymore. I don't have the energy to pretend. I can't unsee what I see now." This is not arrogance. It's integration. 2. How it shows up in relationships. Relationships are where this shift becomes impossible to hide. Because relationships are built on unconscious agreements. Before the shift, many connections are held together by familiarity, shared history, unspoken roles, a mutual avoidance, emotional dependency. As your awareness increases, these agreements surface. You start noticing how often you overgive, where you silence yourself, who benefits from you staying small, which connections drain rather than nourish. And here's the uncomfortable part. You may still love people, but no longer resonate with the dynamic. This creates a strange tension. You don't want to hurt anyone, but you also can't keep abandoning yourself. That's why this phase often includes emotional distance, fewer but deeper conversations, boundaries that feel sudden to others, relationships naturally falling away. Not because you're pushing people out, but because you're no longer holding yourself back. Some connections will adapt, others won't. And that's not failure. That's differentiation. 3. Why goals start to change or disappear. One of the most confusing parts of the shift is what happens to motivation. People often say, "I don't know what I want anymore. I lost my drive. My goals don't excite me." But this isn't a lack of ambition. It's a recalibration of meaning. Before the shift, many goals are driven by a validation, fear, comparison, survival, proving worth. As awareness increases, those motivations lose emotional charge. Your nervous system no longer responds to them. That's why forcing motivation doesn't work anymore. The old fuel source is gone. And until a new one forms, rooted in authenticity rather than approval, you're in a temporary pause. This pause isn't emptiness. It's gestation. New desires don't arrive until the old identity fully releases its grip. 4. Decision-making becomes quieter and sharper. Here's something subtle but powerful. As this shift deepens, decision-making changes. You stop overthinking. Not because you have answers, but because you trust your internal signals more. Decisions begin to feel simpler, slower, less dramatic, more embodied. You start asking different questions. Does this expand me or drain me? Does this align with who I'm becoming? Can I live with the long-term emotional cost of this? And once you ask those questions, many options eliminate themselves. This can feel limiting at first, but it's actually liberating, because clarity reduces noise. 5. Why daily life feels different. Even ordinary moments change. Your tolerance for constant stimulation drops. You crave quiet, depth, intentionality, presence. Small talk feels exhausting. Multitasking feels dysregulating. Busyness without meaning feels unbearable. This isn't withdrawal. It's nervous system intelligence. Your mind is prioritizing quality over quantity. And this has a side effect most people don't expect. You start needing less to feel fulfilled. Less validation. Less noise. Less external input. Which can feel strange in a world built on more, faster, louder. 6. The aha realization most people have. At some point in this process, a realization lands, not intellectually, but viscerally. It sounds like this. I wasn't broken. I was evolving in an environment that no longer fit. This moment reframes everything. Past confusion makes sense. Old struggles gain context. Self-judgment dissolves. You realize that much of your anxiety wasn't pathology, it was misalignment. And misalignment always resolves through awareness, not force. 7. Why some people feel calmer as others feel more chaotic. This is where the divergence becomes obvious. As external systems feel unstable, people react differently. Those resisting internal change feel anxious, reactive, overwhelmed, desperate for certainty. Those allowing internal change feel grounded, observant, less attached, more flexible, not because they're better, but because they've stopped demanding that reality stay familiar. They've adapted internally, and internal adaptation is what creates resilience. 8. What this means for your future self. Here's the most important implication of all. This shift isn't about escaping life. It's about participating in it more honestly. Your future self isn't someone with perfect clarity. They're someone with self-trust, emotional literacy, adaptability, internal coherence. Someone who can navigate uncertainty without collapsing. That's the real shift. Not into something mystical, but into a more integrated version of yourself. And here's the final realization most people reach. The world didn't suddenly become chaotic. Your awareness expanded enough to notice what was always there. That awareness can feel heavy, or it can feel empowering. The difference lies in whether you fight it or work with it. Which brings us to the most practical question of all. How do you actually apply this awareness in a way that stabilizes you, grounds you, and helps you move forward without forcing clarity before it's ready? That's exactly what we're going to explore next. Now let's bring this down to ground level. Because awareness without application doesn't stabilize you, it leaves you floating. And this phase of change isn't about chasing more insight. It's about learning how to live from the insight you already have. Here are 4 specific, grounded practices that help you move through this shift without forcing answers or collapsing into uncertainty. These aren't generic self-help tools. They're designed for this exact psychological state. 1. The perception reset practice. Stop interpreting, start observing. One of the biggest mistakes people make during this phase is trying to immediately interpret everything. What does this mean? Why is this happening? What should I do next? But here's the truth. Clarity doesn't come from interpretation. It comes from observation. Your first task is not to label the shift, but to watch it. Here's how. For 1 week, stop trying to fix your feelings. Instead, notice. What drains you? What grounds you? What creates resistance? What creates calm? No analysis. No judgment. Just data collection. This trains your nervous system to trust awareness instead of control. And you'll notice something surprising. Patterns reveal themselves without effort. That's your subconscious communicating in its native language. 2. The energy economy rule. Protect what costs you. As this shift deepens, your energy becomes more valuable and more limited. This isn't burnout. It's prioritization. Your nervous system is recalibrating, and it can't process excess noise. So ask yourself daily, What is this costing me emotionally? If an activity, conversation, or obligation consistently leaves you depleted, that's information, not failure. Begin reducing exposure to unnecessary arguments, constant updates, emotional labor that isn't reciprocal, environments that overstimulate. This isn't withdrawal. It's conservation. You're protecting the internal resources required for integration. 3. The identity gap practice. Live as the bridge, not the destination. This is critical. Most people suffer because they try to become the future version of themselves too quickly. But growth doesn't work that way. You are currently the bridge between who you were and who you're becoming. So instead of asking, "Who am I now?" what would someone in transition do today? That means choosing honesty over performance, pacing yourself without guilt, allowing uncertainty without panic, making decisions that reduce internal friction. You don't need a final identity. You need coherence. Coherence is what stabilizes you. 4. The signal versus noise filter. Trust the quiet signal. As awareness increases, everything can feel louder. Thoughts, emotions, opinions, possibilities. But here's the distinction most people miss. Noise is urgent and loud. Signals are quiet and consistent. If something keeps returning, not emotionally charged, not dramatic, but steady, pay attention. The direction that feels calm but unfamiliar is often the correct one. The one that feels intense but chaotic is often the old pattern resisting change. This practice builds intuition, not as mysticism, but as refined pattern recognition. What you'll notice when you apply these practices. If you use these tools consistently, 3 shifts happen naturally. 1. Internal pressure decreases. You stop fighting the unknown. The nervous system relaxes. 2. Decisions feel clearer. Not because you know the future, but because you trust your alignment. 3. Stability returns without certainty. You feel grounded even when answers aren't fully formed. That's the real integration. Why this works without magic? Because these practices do one thing exceptionally well. They bring subconscious information into conscious awareness, gently. And once something is conscious, it no longer controls you from the shadows. This is the psychological observer effect. Awareness collapses confusion into clarity. Not instantly, but reliably. And that's the difference between those who experience this shift as chaos and those who experience it as awakening. So now we arrive at the final step. Not another technique, not another insight, but integration. What does all of this mean when you zoom out? What is the deeper truth behind this shift? And what question should you carry forward as 2026 approaches? That's where we'll close. So let's bring everything together. What people call a quantum shift isn't a mysterious event waiting on the calendar. It's a psychological transition already happening inside certain people, quietly, unevenly, and very personally. Throughout this video, we've explored why life can suddenly feel unfamiliar, why old goals lose their grip, why relationships shift without drama, and why some people feel destabilized while others feel strangely steady. And the answer isn't destiny. It's awareness. This shift begins the moment your subconscious stops protecting your old identity and starts preparing you for a new one. Not because something is wrong with you, but because something in you has outgrown its previous form. That's the truth about who will experience this shift. Not everyone. Only those whose internal world is already changing. If you're feeling more observant than reactive, less attached to noise, more aware of what drains you and what aligns you, then you're not falling behind. You're adapting. And adaptation, not belief, not prediction, is what determines whether periods of change feel like chaos or clarity. Here's the part most people miss. You don't need to rush this. You don't need answers right now. And you don't need to become someone else overnight. You just need to stop abandoning the signals your awareness is already giving you. Because once you trust that inner guidance, grounded, quiet, and consistent, your life reorganizes around it naturally. So as we move forward, carry this question with you. What parts of my life am I being invited to release? Not because they're wrong, but because I've outgrown them. If this resonated, drop a comment about what you're noticing in your own life right now. And subscribe to Echoes Between Worlds for more deep dives into psychology, consciousness, and the hidden mechanics shaping human experience. We're just getting started.